So a friend of Dallas Willard, Dallas Willard was a professor at University of Southern California for many, many years. He was also an ordained Baptist minister. He wrote a lot on faith and spirituality. I know he's had a big impact on my life as well. And at one point, one of his friends asked him if he could, if he used one word to describe Jesus, what would it be? So if I ask you if you had one word to describe Jesus, what would it be? This is the interactive part. What? Just say it out. What? Love. Awesome. Anything else? Selfless. Okay, selfless. Anyone else? Well, what Dallas Willard responded, he said, if there's one word I could describe Jesus, it is relaxed. Now, that's not an adjective I would normally think of applying to Jesus. It'd be a long ways down the list before I thought of relaxed as a way, as a descriptor for Jesus. It's not the first thing that would come to my mind, like your love, compassion, kindness, his self-giving. But he said relaxed, and he said, and he made the statement that Jesus was never in a hurry. He always had time for people. He was never too busy to slow down. And as I was thinking about that, I think of some of the stories in the gospel. You think of when Jesus was speaking and some of the little kids wanted to come to him, and the disciples saying, oh, no, we don't keep the kids away. What did Jesus do? He didn't say, no, I'm too busy, I'm preaching, can't you see? He stopped, he really rebuked the disciples and said, let the little children come to me. He had time for the children. Or I think the times where he would be in a crowd, he's going along the highway. You think of one time there was a blind man who was yelling for Jesus, and everyone wanted Jesus to walk right on by. I mean, they had places to go, things to do, and Jesus stopped and heard him and responded and healed him. Or the woman that had been bleeding for many years, same thing. He's going on his way, he feels, she touches him, he feels power going out, and he stops. He said, who did that? Something happened. And so I think Dallas is really onto something here, because Jesus was never too busy, was never in a hurry. He always had time for people. Always had time for people. And as we continue our Lenten series, Living into the Cross, this week I want to talk about dying to busyness, and I'd probably add hurry. Dying to busyness and hurry, because that's not the way Jesus lived his life. Now, if we turn to the scriptures, we come to Exodus chapter 20. Moses on the mountain, he's given the 10 commandments. And in particular, we're talking about the commandment about the Sabbath. Now, basically, the commandment on the Sabbath reflects back to the creation. Because if you remember in Genesis 1 right up to Genesis 2, God makes, on the first day God did, on the second day God did this. And then in Genesis 2:2 it says, by the seventh day God finished the work he had been doing, so he rested from all his work. So he rested from all his work. So basically, the commandment in Exodus is really kind of a shadow or a calling back, a looking back to the basic rhythm of creation that God had created, and God had created a period for rest. God had created a period for rest. Now, it was meant to be a holy day, a time to be spent not working. And one of the things that was particularly important, and this, when in Deuteronomy chapter 5, when Moses gives the 10 commandments again before they go into the promised land, he restates this commandment, but there's really an emphasis about even your slaves. It's not only you, everything about you, all your workers, your animals, even your slaves, as they're transitioning from slavery to freedom, there was an emphasis about even your slaves shall have rest. Even your slaves shall have rest. So this was kind of an all-encompassing command. And they were to spend time with God. They weren't supposed to be doing work. And then the Jews then had many individual smaller regulations in terms of what you could do and what you couldn't do on the Sabbath. But again, it really is a callback. It's really trying to bring in a rhythm, if you may, the rhythm of creation, of God's creation, that somehow mysteriously intersects with humans, with Israel, and with the whole creation. So this commandment about keeping the Sabbath day and keeping it holy, it was meant to be for a day of rest. Now, that brings us to the story in Mark chapter 2 in the gospel lesson. So in that story, Jesus is going through the fields. The disciples are picking grain to eat. That was not supposed to happen. The Pharisees see this. They're very critical of Jesus in terms of why would you let your disciples do this? And then Jesus makes the response that I think is so very powerfully important. He says this. Verse 27 says, "Then Jesus said to the Pharisees, 'The Sabbath day was made to help people. They were not made to be ruled by the Sabbath day.'" That's in the New Century Version. So the Sabbath day was made to help people. They were not made to be ruled by the Sabbath day. Now, I think this is an incredibly important qualification, or even a giving of the larger picture that Jesus was doing when he was confronted with the Pharisees' criticism. He's saying, look, folks, God established the Sabbath, God established the day of rest, not so you can be all bound up in a set of rules. The Sabbath was actually meant for you. It's meant to help people. It's meant to be good for you. That's why God established the Sabbath. And so I think he really took that understanding of the Sabbath, and I think elevated it in a very healthy way, in a way that you and I think, need to understand the appropriateness and the importance of keeping the Sabbath, but in creative and flexible ways. Creative and flexible ways. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh boy, he's going to say we got to spend the whole day of the Sabbath, I got to do this, I got to do that, and you're going to put me on a big guilt trip, which is not my intention at all. My intention is to invite you into the space of being creative and understanding how might God be speaking to us about rest, about taking Sabbath, about not being in a hurry. Now, I think of a couple things when I think about this. The first is we live in a 24/7 culture, right? We live 24/7. Now, personally, I don't think that's very healthy, because we don't, in our kind of daily rhythm, even in a society, we don't ever work in a time for rest. I remember several, I don't know, maybe it was before Black Friday, Thanksgiving or something. I remember reading a blog or something, and the person was saying, you know, we always are open, we're doing things 24/7, but we never realize it's always convenient for us, but for it to be convenient to us, guess what? It's going to be inconvenient for a lot of people. So for me to be shopping 24/7 to do something, that means there's someone who has got to be working to do that. I never really thought about it in quite that way, but our whole culture is geared in that way. And so we're geared really not to have any kind of a healthy rhythm to our lives. It's just always one thing after the next, one thing after the next. And as I was thinking about this, it seems to me that one of the highest values that we have in our culture is that of being productive, right? We want to be productive. And in fact, I think we derive a lot of our sense of self-worth, a lot of how we value ourselves in terms of what we produce. The more we produce, the better we feel about ourselves, the more important that we feel about ourselves. And so this then begins, you're just on this wheel, constantly chasing, and things get busier and busier and busier. Let me share my experience about this. Well, I'm not very proud of, but I'm kind of embarrassed about this. But so when I was hired here, when I first was hired here, I just finished up my PhD. I just had sat for my oral defense. I didn't know if I wanted to go back into the pastor, if I wanted to teach, if I wanted to go into clinical work. And it just so happened that I could do all three. So I was offered this position. It turns out that there was an adjunct faculty, part-time adjunct faculty position open at Andover Newton. And I had a little tiny clinical practice at a pastoral counseling center in Foxborough. So the church was crazy enough to hire me and to say, well, you got to work 40, I can't remember what the hour is, and you can work another, however much you want to work. You can do work at adjunct faculty, and you can do your counseling. And so that's what I did. Now, I have to tell you, I felt so important. I mean, I felt so important, and I had a briefcase with stuff for the church. I had a briefcase for my counseling practice where I kept my process notes, and I had a briefcase for my teaching at Andover Newton. And I remember I had friends, we had friends from professors at URI. One time they visited and they saw my 3 briefcases, and they were so impressed about how organized I was. Now the reality is, so I was trying to get as little sleep as possible, and you know, I was focused. I was going to do all this stuff. You know, the truth is, I mean, I would complain to people, I say, I'm so busy, but beneath it, I felt so proud for how important I was. I mean, really, when you're doing all this stuff, you got to be important, right? You got to be important. So, you know, I'm always running around doing this, and it was probably just a few years later that I realized, it dawned on me how really unchristlike and unhealthy my schedule was. It was, Phil, what are you doing? This is not healthy. This is not good. But I was deriving kind of this deep satisfaction, like I must be really important because I'm doing all these different things. Now, I think I'm not the only person that does stuff like that. I think we all kind of load up our schedules sometimes, and we do that because we derive a sense of importance. And the more we do, the more productive. I was having a conversation with a friend over breakfast, and I was chatting about my sermon. He said, yeah, basically, we become human doings, not human beings, right? We become human doings, not human beings. And so when we talk about Jesus being relaxed, when we talk about rest and having a rhythm of work and rest is so important to spiritual life. Actually, it's very important to our physical health, our mental health as well. But taking the rest, saying no or dying to always being in a hurry. I don't know about you, but the busier I am, the more in a hurry I am. I do not like myself when I'm in a hurry. Because when I'm in a hurry, if something gets in my way and blocks it, I frequently don't respond in a Christ-like manner. And I don't like that about myself, but I know that hurry makes that happen. When we were, a number of years ago, and Michelle had taken a year abroad, she was in South Africa. One of the things about Africa, things are slower, but we were driving through South Africa, put many miles on the car as we were visiting. And one of the things, when I travel, it's like I want to get from point A to B. Like I want to get there, okay? I want to get there. And so because I want to get there, a lot of times I miss things. I'm so focused on getting there. But one of the things, like when we would stop for gas, you wouldn't fill your own tank. There would be an attendant who would fill your tank. And I remember the normal process when you get there, you pull into the gas station, there'd be an attendant, and they'd be very friendly. Hi, how are you? Da, 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 da. And my first response, I mean, it's just like automatic. I roll down the window and I'd say, hi, I want 5, I fill the tank up. And Beth would say to me, Phil, you could be friendly. I mean, here the guy is, really trying to be friendly. And it wasn't like I was trying to be unfriendly. I was so focused on getting to the point that I wanted to be, I didn't take the time to be friendly with the people. And so I really had to work with it. My default setting, every time we came to a gas station, we needed gas or do something, I just wanted to get the work done, fill the tank. And I didn't want to take the time. It just didn't come naturally to me. Again, that's just a small little example, though, of how we get so focused, so busy, and so in a hurry that we miss things. Which brings me to the second point. So in addition to us being in a society where we really value productivity and draw our sense of self from that, I think it's also true that when we're really busy in a hurry, like the example I just gave, we become distracted. We miss that which is going on around us. We don't see. We're just so focused on what we want to do, what our plans are, how we want to get it done, that we don't actually and we don't experience what is going on around us. There was a famous experiment, I think as a psychologist did, a number of years ago. I don't remember the details, but he assigned half the class some tasks that they needed to do, and he gave them a pretty short time frame, like you have to do this in 45 minutes. The other half of the class, he gave them the assignment, and it wasn't under a time constraint. He, in the meantime, hired an actor who was outside the school, outside the classroom, outside the building, who had some kind of a problem. I don't remember what the problem was. And so when the students left the class, this guy, I mean, there might have been several actors. Anyway, so they obviously were expressing kind of a need, that something wasn't working. Guess what he found? Anyone want to guess? The people on the time constraints, almost nobody stopped to help the guy. Almost nobody. The people without the time constraints, they stopped and helped the person. And so it might sound like kind of a minor detail, but if we want to be living the Christ life if we want to be following Jesus to the cross, then we need to die to this need that we have of being so busy and so much in a hurry. It prevents us from living life. It prevents us from getting into the rhythm of a healthy life. It prevents us from really seeing the needs around us because we're always in a rush. We're always being busy. Now, can you do this? Can you live 24/7? Well, you can do it for a while. It reminds me of when I would have talks with my daughters about changing the oil in their car. I'd say, well, you need to change the oil every 3,000 miles. If it's synthetic, it's every 5,000 miles. Do you have to change the oil every 3,000 miles or every 5,000 miles? No, you don't. You don't have to do it. And my daughters proved it. I give them the talk every once in a while. But if you want your car to last, you need to do it. You can go 24/7. You can go for a long time, but something will break down. You'll break down physically. You'll break down psychologically. Maybe you'll break down spiritually. Maybe all three. You can push it. You can push the envelope, and you can do it. But the end result, it's destructive on us in terms of who we are and what we do. Now, many of you, so this is the part where I don't want to put a guilt trip on you, because many of you you're incredibly busy lives. Your kids, are in sports, they're in school, they're after, and you might be thinking, well, how on earth can I ever do this? How can I just can't stop my life, and my life already feels like it's on the treadmill. And so this is where I think we need to be creative and we need to take small steps. I think it's good to get ideas as a group. Maybe it's just taking, if you can slow down 15 minutes, if you can carve out 15 minutes in a day at a particular time, where you just stop. Maybe you do meditation. You just slow down. You just breathe. Maybe you could build that up to a half an hour. What if as families, and I know this is super hard when you've got kids that are involved, what if one day a week you did something together? You all turned off your internet, your devices for an hour or so. Maybe it's at a meal. And you did that. I know this is not easy, because when my daughters were going through school, it was crazy. We hardly ever ate a meal together. But we need to fight for these things. These things are really important if we're going to be followers of Jesus, if we're going to be attending to those around us and hearing the needs around us and being able to listen and to be able to see and to be able to respond. If we're going to be following Jesus to the cross, we need to work on slowing down, becoming less busy, and we need to be creative in doing it. We don't have to be legalistic and say, well, on Sunday I can't do anything. I mean, at this day and age, that would be impossible anyways. I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting you find creative ways. Maybe in small groups we can, if you have friends, how can we carve out time where we can actually spend time with God, with one another, and with ourselves? It's really so essential to following the life of Jesus. It's so essential to following the life of Jesus. And so I want to encourage us, and Lent is a great time. One of the things even about the Christian year, there is this rhythm to the calendar. We start with Christmas, we go into Ash Wednesday and Lent, there's Easter, there is a rhythm to the church calendar as well. And so I would encourage you to take advantage in this Lenten season as we are living into the cross to ask yourselves, how might I be living? What changes might I make in my life and my family's life, even if they're just small changes, that will give me some time, some Sabbath rest, some space that I can spend with God? And it's not only spending it with God, they would spend it together. They would spend it in community. That's really important time. That's time well spent. And spending times by ourselves. If we do this, it means, well, being relaxed, just like that. Amen.